Lesson 4-1, Connect Percents, Fractions, and Decimals. How are percents, fractions, and decimals related? That's what we're going to explore in this set of notes. Question 1. What is a percent? The word percent actually comes from the Latin percentum, which literally means out of 100. So when you see the word per, you mean out of, and centum means 100. So you can think of things that have the root word cent, like cents in a dollar, there are 100. Years in a century, there are 100. So all of those relate back to that Latin phrase percentum, which means out of 100. How can I write a percent as a fraction? Because the word percent means out of 100, then when you write a percent in fraction form, the denominator is 100. Your percent value is the numerator, and you need to remove the percent symbol. So for example, 25% means 25 out of 100. So 25% would be written as 25 over 100, and then you would simplify that by dividing the top and bottom by common factors. In this case, they both divide by 25 to get the fraction 1/4. Question 3. How can I write a percent as a decimal? The first step is to divide the percent by 100 and remove the percent symbol. So 25% would be the same as 25 divided by 100, which is equal to 25 hundredths, 0.25. Now let's take a look at a couple of examples. 9/10%, or 0.9%, is the same as 9/10 divided by 100. And when you do that division, you actually get the decimal 9 thousandths, which is the same thing as the 9/10% in decimal form. Now, if you go back to the percent, 9/10%, and you try to write that in its fraction form, it looks a little different because your numerator has a decimal in it, and it really shouldn't. So to get rid of that decimal, you could multiply both the numerator and denominator by 10, and this will show you that 9 out of 1,000 is the equivalent fraction that goes with the 9/10% in its decimal form. That just shows you that we can still write it with a denominator of 100, but actually in its proper form, the denominator would be 1,000. In the next example, we have 37 5/10%. Again, this percentage has a decimal in it, but I'm still going to divide by 100 in order to change that percent into its decimal form. So the decimal for 37 5/10% is 375 thousandths. Now try this one. What do you think happens if you have 110%? Well, if you guess that you're still going to divide by 100, you're correct. And this time, your decimal is 1 1/10. So do you see any sort of a shortcut here? Yeah, the shortcut is you can actually move the decimal 2 places to the left. That is the same action as dividing by 100. And here's a picture of what your page should look like on the front. And when you're finished with those notes, go ahead and flip it to the back. Question 4 asks, how can I write a fraction as a percent? Well, this is actually a 2-step process. And the first step that you have to do is you have to change that fraction into a decimal. In order to get a decimal, we need to divide the numerator by the denominator. So take a look at this fraction, 2/5. There we go. And if you take that fraction and change it into a decimal, you do 2 divided by 5. And when you do that on your calculator, you get the decimal 4/10. This decimal here is the decimal we're going to use in order to change into its percent form. And we will make that decimal now into a percent by answering question 5. In order to take a decimal as a percent, you're going to do the opposite of what you did on the front side to make a percent a decimal. And that was question 3. So to make your decimal a percent, you need to multiply by 100, and then you need to add your percent symbol. Because now the number is no longer a decimal, you've now turned it into a percent. So 2/5, which was 2 divided by 5, is equal to 4/10, and 4/10 times 100 equals 40%. So here are your 3 equivalent forms of the same value. 2/5 as a fraction is equal to 0.4, or 4/10 in decimal form, which is equal to 40% in its percentage form. Next, let's do some practice. I'm going to give you 3 practice problems, and each one is going to begin with a different number and value in a different form. So your job is going to be to turn that number into its equivalent other 2 forms. So take a look at these 3 problems, Number 1 is 72%. Your job is to make 72% into its equivalent decimal and its equivalent fraction. For number 2, the fraction is 3/4. I want you to give me the equivalent decimal and the equivalent percent that are equal to the fraction 3/4. And in number 3, I've given you the decimal 38/100, or 0.38, and I want you to give me the equivalent percent and the equivalent fraction for that decimal value. Don't forget that when you make your fractions, you should simplify them into their simplest form. Try those problems and pause the video, and then come back and check your answer when you're done. All right, take a look at those answers. Notice that my fractions began with the percent number over 100, and then I simplified them into their lowest terms. All right, so here is a snapshot of page 2 of your notes.